Greetings, friends. I'm Peter Hulak here representing the Adult Education and Spiritual Formation Committee at Montview, and have the honor to introduce not just today's speaker, but briefly also to introduce the rest of the 5-week series we have. So here are some thoughts to get us started. Not so long ago, it was out of the question to talk about religion and politics. In today's era, though, disagreement is often not only expressed, it is overt and even hurtful. As election day approaches, the world seems to need a way to bring people together. We propose the radical idea that the church is just the community that can do that, empowered by the words of Micah to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. It begins with working hard to talk to one another with dignity, respect, and honesty. This series of 5 presentations, sponsored by Montview's Adult Education Committee, will be led by 5 different experts in their fields. They will help us navigate these treacherous waters of keeping our relationships healthy while we disagree, approaching November 3rd and beyond. The greatest joy for me for this hour will be in a moment to introduce Buie Seawell to you. If I may, though, let me introduce the 4 speakers to follow. On October 11th, our topic will be Holy Chaos, Creating Connections in Divisive Times. And that leader will be Reverend Amanda Henderson, who's the Executive Director of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado and author of a newly released book called, yes, Holy Chaos, Creating Connections in Divisive Times. So to be sure to tune in on October 11th for that. The following week, the topic will be this: politicians have families too, talking across the dinner table divide. You'll be interested to note that the speaker will be our friend, our Montview member, and our Congresswoman Diana DeGette. She's been our representative in Colorado's 1st Congressional District since 1997. On October 25th, the topic will be Torn Apart, Still Seeking a Beloved Community. The speaker will be Park Hill neighbor and Jungian analyst Chris Cho. 2 more talks here. On November 1st, the topic will be An Ambivalent Cloud of Witnesses, led by Dr. Kyle Lambelet, who's on the faculty of Candler School of Theology in Atlanta. So now to the business of today, the fun business. Buie Seawell is Professor Emeritus of Business Ethics and Law at the Daniels College, University of Denver. He holds degrees in history from Davidson College, theology from Union Presbyterian Seminary in Virginia, and law from Sturm College at DU. You'll be interested to know that he did postgraduate work at Edinburgh University and a sabbatical as a member of St. Antony's College in Oxford. He also served as in the administration of Governor Richard Lamb as Colorado Energy Conservation Director, was Chief of Staff to U.S. Senator Gary Hart, and from 1985 to 89, chairman of the Colorado Democratic Party. Before moving to Colorado in 1971, Buie served as a Presbyterian pastor in Alabama and in North Carolina. He has 6 children and get this, 16 grandkids. Well, welcome, Buie. We're deeply glad to have you with us today. Please say hello before I ask you a question.
What?
Please say hello. Then I have a question for you.
Look, it is such an honor to be back again, even though this time via Zoom, with the adult class at Montview. I've said this in other contexts, and I'm not as they say in politics, trying to blow smoke up your leg. But this community of people is the most engaging and thoughtful in the many venues I teach in of any, from universities to political gatherings to community meetings. This is a special group, and what you're doing is a special thing. I am just truly honored to be here.
Oh, Buie, thank you. And if I may, let me just introduce the topic of today and ask you some questions.
Sure.
So here you go. We are today beset by so many simultaneous pandemics. One of those infectious agents is so small that even scientists need electron microscopes to see them. Some of the other perils that have gotten us are really enormous. Things like racism, violence, partisan politics, and just plain getting along with each other. Things this huge are sometimes just as hard to see as the tiny ones. So we have asked you, Buie, to set the stage for us. Here are some questions. Have these pandemics taught us anything new about who we have always been? Do they help us understand anything about the arc of history that we didn't know before? And do you have some thoughts about how we could live better? Welcome, Buie.
Pete, thank you for the welcome. That's an enormously thoughtful set of questions. I would begin, at least in part, this way. We're going through a crisis in governance, a crisis in economics, a crisis in the environment, and a crisis in the very structure of our society. Issues long left unaddressed are now in front of us, and not in any orderly manner, not one at a time, not sequential, so we could get our hands around this or that. But we're thrust into this moment. The word crisis in part comes from the notion of being judged. We are now being critically examined by history. And standing at a moment of judgment is unpleasant. And the feelings that we have of, we've never seen anything like this, are legitimate feelings. The question is as old as the Republic. I think we all recall that maybe apocryphal, but maybe not, I take it to be not, story of a lady who came up to Benjamin Franklin at the end of the work in Philadelphia on our Constitution and said, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" And his famous response was, "A republic, if we can keep it." This election is about whether we can keep that republic. It is not going to be an easy task. John Adams, who was our second president, who was not as flamboyant, as articulate, as perhaps epically thoughtful as Thomas Jefferson, his friend and also political opponent. But John Adams is someone, in spite of his conservatism, that I have always admired. He said, "Remember, democracies never last forever. It too soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There was never a democracy yet that did not commit suicide." Those are heavy thoughts. We may be on the cusp of losing it. And we need not to kid ourselves. This election is pivotal. I know Old politicians are used to saying that every 4 years or so. But this time, damn it, it's true. This time, we are faced with a pivotal moment in time, and everything is on the table. Healthcare. You know, that's a big enough issue that this country has struggled with for well over 50 years. And that just handling it would take the creative energy and thoughtfulness of all of us as citizens together. The environment, we look at what is happening in California, even what is happening in the forest of Colorado. We look at the storms. There were 5 tropical systems in the Atlantic where I used to sail a sailboat. I don't think I have the nerve anymore to sail across oceans or get into that environment. And then in the midst of all of that, a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic. And it in itself is testing every fiber and sinew of the body politic of this country and the politics of our planet. You've heard all these things before, but now comes the moment when we must choose how we wish to address this pivotal moment. And I used to run a polling firm between when I was an active politician and when I finally discovered that teaching in a university was far better than politicking for public office. And I would love now to have the capacity to look in detail at what is going on in the body politic. I still get up in the morning, and I bet like many of you go to 538 and see what is happening in the most recent polls and that evaluation of the public mind and public consciousness. But it is murky water. Anyone who says they know how the 3rd of November will turn out probably doesn't know how the 3rd of November will turn out. Elections are in the hands of the people, and it is not a spectator sport. It is something that requires all of us in it. Pete, is it okay to quote scripture? I'm teasing, of course. One of my favorite stories from the New Testament is a story Jesus told about a rich guy who threw a banquet. And to me, it is not so much about a rich guy's banquet, but that banquet being a metaphor for the moment of our deciding, for our coming together to choose. I'll simply read it. When one of those reclining with him heard this, he said to Jesus, "Blessed is everyone who will eat at the feast in the great kingdom of God." But Jesus replied, "A certain man prepared a banquet and invited many, many guests. And when it was time for the banquet, he sent his servants to tell those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything now is ready.' But one after another, those invited began to make excuses. The first said, 'I have bought a field and I need to see to it. Please excuse me.' Another said, 'I've bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. Please excuse me.' Still another said, 'I've married a wife and I cannot come.' The servant returned and this to his master. Then the owner of the house, having had a report that all had made excuses, said, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the city and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, the lame. Sir, the servant replied, what you ordered has been done, and there is still room. So the master told his servant, look, go out into the highways and byways, the hedges, the alleys, the back alleys, and compel them to come in, so that my house will be full. For I tell you, not one of those who were first invited will taste this banquet. The election ahead of us is about showing up. We may or may not still deserve this republic. But if we don't show up, I can promise you we're going to lose it. I'm 83. I didn't want to live to see that happen. As you pointed out, I've got some pretty significant skin in the game, as they say, when it comes to the future. They're my children, my grandchildren. Their future depends on what we are about to do. It depends on whether or not we show up. Just because we're good, liberal people, just because we are a wonderfully committed congregation of people in the best neighborhood in the United States, is not enough. We got to show up, and we got to get others to show up. And I don't think it's about so much arguing people to vote the way we think we should vote. It's just to show up. I am not a mathematician, as most every person who has ever taught me in my many years of school would quickly tell you. But I can do simple arithmetic. Let's just say, I'm making this up, that 40% of our country thinks one way and 60% thinks another way. Now, you would think that in a democracy that would settle the matter. But what if 80% of the 40% shows up and only 60% of the 60% shows up? You got a really close election. Just do the math. And if the turnout of the 60% is as low as 40%, you've got a landslide in the other direction, not because of a majority, but because of who shows up. It is not enough this time to simply vote. I think our ballots in Colorado arrive on the 9th of October, or mailed on the 9th of October. We have a wonderful system that has had absolutely next to no corruption. It is the easiest thing in the world to participate by voting in Colorado. But it's not enough to return your ballots. You are like the servants in the story of the banquet. Every single day you have a chance. You go somewhere and knock on some door. You make some phone call. You speak to someone about voting, about showing up for the sacrament of the Republic. Every single day. It is not enough to wear your little badge that says, I voted. And don't argue. Just get them to vote. Even if you don't agree with them, turn them out. This is a turnout election. This is just like Jesus' story. It's not being good folks who are too busy. It's being the halt and the lame and the poor, but getting your vote in and getting others to vote. Every single day from here to the 3rd of November, we need to ask everyone we run into, have you voted? And we need to show them respect, not because of agreement of how they voted, but that they did vote. We're about to lose this republic. And it will be on our hands. Our hands had better be, well, a socially distanced perspective, touching others and telling them this time, damn it, it really counts. It makes tremendous difference. Of course, along with voting, there is civility. We've talked about that a number of times in the very setting of the adult class. One of the things I think that a great congregation like the Montview Boulevard Presbyterian Church has to share is being able to listen and affirm. Our system, we don't pay attention to this enough. I don't know, the economists and political scientists would call it our political economy. There are two pieces. We have a representative democracy, and we have a free market system with financial agents. Both representation and agency fundamentally requires one thing, and that is trust. Trusting who you elect to represent you, even in disagreement. Trusting your fellow citizens. That's the political side of trust. The economic side of trust, heck, we call, savings and loans, we used to call them trust institutions. An economy only works, a free economy, a free market, if there is sufficient trust in the system. Here is what frightens an old guy who's played probably too much politics in his life. It is possible for dishonorable politicians to use the trust that is provided to their own selfish ends and interest, and in so doing, destroy it. And we have watched that happen. Trust has eroded. Jefferson was once asked by a friend of his in Virginia, a Judge Tyler, who actually was the father of a president later on after Jefferson, what was essentially required for a Jeffersonian republic to work? And Jefferson wrote back to Judge Tyler saying, fundamentally, it's just two things. I love Jefferson because he could be so succinct. Two things: truth and rationality. How are we doing? Truth and rationality. And behold, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Republics don't exist without candor, without truthfulness, because there's no way we can govern ourselves if we're deceived by those who govern us. And then rationality. Science has done so much. We're so dependent on the wealth that's created and the systems that's put in place and the perspective that it gives us. And being rational is honoring the critical thinking that created the scientific revolution. For people of faith, it's important when we enter the public sphere to approach each other with respect. As Jefferson said, honor the genius of your fellow citizens. To approach our citizens, our fellow citizens, with respect, and to seek and to give truth, and to speak in rational terms to each other. Emotive feelings are wonderful, but when it comes down to it, we need to decide things using our God-given reason. Come, let us reason together, saith the Lord. We need to do that. We need to respect each other's approach and thoughtfulness. And we need to seek to have our own thoughts respected. In a sense, we leave the beliefs of our faith behind when we engage in the public sphere with citizens of different faiths and different persuasions. We are there because of our faith, but we don't try to convert people, we try to reason with people. And the Republic is having a difficult time with that today. I watch, I don't know about the rest of you, but I watch way too much cable news. I just have to confess that. It is a compulsion of long years in politics and teaching. But I watched the other day one of the most frustrating exchanges I have ever seen. It's a political rally, big political rally. A reporter was there asking people questions, focused mostly on the pandemic and the fact that the people at the rally were almost unanimously not wearing masks. And the reporter was asking this woman why she didn't have on a mask. And the woman replied, because this is a free country, because this is a republic, this is not a dictatorship. I don't have to do what the government says I should do. My freedom is to not wear a mask. And I thought of my own study of Immanuel Kant, who said that his entire approach to ethics and philosophy began with the concept of freedom. Kant is not often thought of, the old stodgy Prussian, as someone who had freedom as his first principle, but he did. And he said, what is freedom? Freedom, he wrote, is the ability to be the legislator in your own Congress or in your own parliament, as he literally said. It's the ability to give yourself the law. And law is both for you and your fellow citizen. It is not simply free to do what you please. It is freedom to act so that both you and those affected by you are treated fairly and justly. To be the legislator in your own parliament, to give yourself the law. One's freedom not to wear masks ends before the droplets reach my breathing system. The responsibility to deal with this pandemic by thinking of the other is so critically important. The libertarian notion that freedom is doing what you damn well please is wrong. Freedom is entering the great arc of history and choosing that which makes us together as a society stronger. I know that Patrick Henry, the great Virginian of our founding, said, "Give me liberty or give me death." But if the libertine impulses in us continue, we will get death. You can count on it. It is our task to give ourselves the law. And that law is a law of responsibility and a law of care and a law driven by the consideration of others. The Montview Boulevard Presbyterian Church at its very heart knows that. I felt it there in its ministry. I felt it there in its advocacy, in its openness. And all we need to do is turn that spirit loose in the community of Denver and Colorado. Because this time around, that's what is needed. The notion that one can be free and not care for one's neighbor is antithetical to everything as human beings that we know. It's interesting, Pete. There is such pride among human beings in the 20th century, becoming aware that there has been a variety of humans in the evolutionary history of life on the planet. We humbly named ourselves Homo sapiens, the wise men. How's that working out? It would seem to me that wisdom is a part of learning to live within your environment, your limits. How many of the 15 Homo species, man-type creatures, human-type creatures, are still with us on the planet? That would be one. 14 varieties of us have flunked out. And it's down to us. We are potentially rational creatures. Jefferson said our democracy depends on the ability to converse, to think, and to act rationally in the context of truth. We're the only fully cognizant species left on Earth. This next period of time is not just about the Republic surviving. It's about the species surviving. We throw around words so easily. We talk about this being an existential moment. Well, pay attention to that. That means it's a moment about existence. I don't know that I wanted to live to this point in history. It's, as I noted, as a somewhat activist in the 60s, as I think back now, it is better to be young when times of great change and responsibility come. It's too bad to be old um, especially when there is a virus among us that seems to be culling the herd, that's focused more on the old than the young. And yet, life presents itself without an invitation. It's in front of us. So I know that sometimes I tend too much to overthink and over dramatize things. I've been fortunate enough to have both children and students who have told me that. But I love the notion of woke. We need to wake up. And this next 40 some days, God chose us to be alive, in my view of time and evolution in history. We're the ones. It's just us. And what will it take? It's going to take patience. We need to exercise extraordinary patience. It may take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks for the results of this election to come in. It may take a year, 2 years, 3 years for a vaccine to begin to stabilize the problems we have with COVID-19. It will take decades to restructure our economy, to rethink our educational system, and to put our government back on a steady keel. That will require, as they used to say, the patience of Job. We've got to carry a heavy burden a long way. The notion that a few days after the 3rd of November, and quote, the good guys winning, that we'll be out of the woods, that is really delusional. It's time for us to buck up, to see that there is an extraordinary period of time ahead of us, and we're the chosen ones. What is it, the Chinese who couldn't decide whether the phrase, may you live in interesting times, was a curse or a well-wish? We're living in interesting times. And we're not a patient people. If you're going to list the virtues of our republic, where would you put patience? It wouldn't be on the first page. Just do it. Time flies. You never know what'll happen next. He who hesitates is lost. Boy, Dan Kahneman wrote a wonderful book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Thinking fast is your knee-jerk reaction. We often get that wrong. I taught some police in Denver for a year, a course on ethics and professional responsibility. We have a wonderful police force. But when an officer of the law has not reflected on their responsibility and draws and shoots too quick, we get some of the problems we're facing today. It's a dangerous job that police officers have to do. And after that year of working with them, I admire them deeply. But we've got to begin to learn to think in patience, in patient time periods, and to work and rework deep issues, and to talk to trusted friends and family about them. We've got to learn to, well, to create the context of consent. And government shall rest upon the consent of the governed. We're going to have big governmental changes. We've got to learn to be consenting adults. And it takes time to do that. My only problem with Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is that in System 2, the slow thinking part of us, where he would certainly argue we human beings are at our best. We are actually Homo sapiens when we take our time to think things through, to stew about them, to not jump to conclusions, to let our both faith and rationality work on the issues. He didn't write a chapter on ethics in that book. But it seems to me ethics is all about the ability to think carefully and slowly and reflectively, and to do so in the context of trusted people. This adult class, the congregation at Montview, in so many ways, the community of Park Hill is a majestic place to practice learning how to be consenting citizens and govern ourselves with wisdom. I sort of end with this. Teaching is a fantastic way to earn one's living, and I've been so blessed to have spent a quarter of a century, not in politics, but in the classroom. You don't always get rewarded well, as most teachers will tell you, for teaching, but I had a tremendous reward one day. I'd finished a class on Aristotelian ethics and talking about the practice of various virtues, among which was patience. For business students, patience is really an alien idea. You got to move quick in the market. Time is of the essence. I once suggested to them that they should pick up one of their young children and hold that little girl in front of them and tell her time is of the essence. Anyway, the class had ended. I think I'd ended by talking about patience. And two of my students are going behind me, behind the lectern where I was, and they were talking to each other. They weren't paying any attention to me. And one of them said, "Pete, damn, that patience thing is hard." And the other one said, just as they went out the door and beyond my hearing, "He wouldn't have called it a virtue if it was easy." That's all the pay you need to get for teaching. We need so badly to be patient with ourselves and our fellow citizens and to show up. That's all the message I got.
Oh, Buie, thank you for your wonderful wisdom, delivered so passionately and patiently. Thank you for it. One more question for us. Tell us another story, if you would. What does patience look like when you encounter another Homo sapiens who expresses something that might be politically to your left or right or in some other universe?
Yeah, a lot of it's in some other universe, but we don't need to go there, please.
Tell us a story about what that looks like.
You know, I'm not so good exactly on saying what patience is. Let me tell you what impatience is. You can feel impatience. You've ever been at a stoplight and you were a little late for a meeting, and the car in front of you had a nice elderly person in it, and they weren't paying full attention. And the light cycled all the way through to yellow and then to red, and you didn't go anywhere. What you feel in your gut is impatience. And Aristotle, at least, would say, rejoice. You now have an opportunity to practice the virtue of patience. Between the wanting to blow your horn and the not doing it, and hoping for the next cycle of the stoplight, and controlling yourself, you have made patience a stronger moral capacity of yourself. I had a wonderful aunt, Aunt Johns. She would go on forever about the silliest damn things you could imagine. I really liked her. But listening to her for minutes, hours on end was enough to drive a young man berserk. And she would say, Buie, let me tell you just one more thing. Now, oh my God. But in listening to Aunt Joss, I showed respect and I learned patience. In fact, I think it is in the ability to listen to others rather than to tell others that we may get through this period of history. People are dying in this technological distanced society just to be heard, just to have someone show them the respect that they're alive and that they make a difference. And patience is the way you do that, I think. If you want to know political patience, read the biography of Nelson Mandela. 27 and a half years in prison to change his nation. Boy, that's patience like you wouldn't believe. So good to be here. Thank
So wonderful to have you. Thank you for sharing yourself with us.
you. Bet. That's all I got. Thanks, Pete.
All right.